are these people?
In trying to debunk some of this hype, I know we're all, none of us likes Elon Musk because he's a multi-gazillionaire and now he's literally a trillionaire. And everyone has reasons for not liking him. I want to remove the emotion from this. I want to look at this fundamentally as a company and forget all they do, forget the politics of this. I'm looking fundamentally at a public company to be invested in for profit, for loss, for speculation, for where it's going to go in the future. I want to look at this as objectively as possible without allowing emotion to really get in the way of the analysis here. Go Start, I'm glad you did not almost miss it. Alexander the All Right, good to see you. Thank you so much for all your support, for all the shares. Really appreciate you. Good to see you at the live stream. So we're going to get into SpaceX tonight, and then again, we're going to talk a lot about all the crap that Israel's been up to like we do every week. So we'll start again with, let me open this up. All right. So I don't normally start at a website like themotleyfool.com. So I'm going to be using a couple of sites I don't normally use that are not totally independent, although I'm going to use independent analysis in the end to break all of this down. Though there are a couple of points I wanted to bring in from these articles that I didn't see brought elsewhere. So that's why I'm bringing it. So this is really important. This was an article written by this Adria Cimino. Now, I don't know how independent or corporate she is. She used to work for Bloomberg a long time ago. She is a tech reporter. She was corporate. I don't know if she is now, but her article, and this is an opinion piece, though it's important, don't buy SpaceX shares before considering the 20 most important words in the company's prospectus. And I'm going to skip down to the 20 most important words, which is right here. So first it talks about their leadership as what they've accomplished as a business. They operate 3 units. Last year completed the most orbital launches of any company. Made important progress in its development of reusable rockets. Okay. But that's not even what this is about. And that's what we're going to look at. All right. SpaceX's satellite-based internet service. We know Starlink, right? It brought in $11.4 billion, while the space unit generated another $4 billion. That's on a total of $18 billion in revenue. All right. At the end of the first quarter, Starlink subscribers had topped 10 million across 164 countries from nothing. It's pretty wild how they built a market from nothing out of Starlink. And again, using government subsidies and government and private satellites, they built this network of and he's got more satellites up there allegedly than anyone, right? But this is the thing. As I mentioned, these businesses are complementary, with the space business being particularly key to the general plan, since many of his goals involve launching materials into orbit. The ability of SpaceX to transport its own material needed for the connectivity in AI businesses is a huge advantage and results in cost savings, particularly through reusable rockets, if he can ever get them there. Now, again, it came all the way back down. It's down to 157. It launched at 150. Here's the 20 important words. Okay. Many of the company's plans and efforts, quote, involve significant technical complexity, unproven technologies, or technologies that do not exist, and such initiatives may not achieve commercial viability. They told you this. These include initiatives such as developing large-scale AI data centers in space, producing AI chips at scale, and transportation to the moon and beyond. Because Toy Story stuff. Okay, into infinity and beyond. Right. So why are these words so important? Because they're clearly stating that if the tech doesn't work out, some of its biggest goals may never be accomplished, which is what all the hype and speculative pricing that's built in is assuming it's going to be. Of course, this is worst case scenario, but it is a risk. This is because SpaceX's future success is closely linked to reaching at least some of these big goals. I thought it was really important to bring this. They don't expect all of it to even happen, but they're acting like everybody needs to expect like it's going to happen. Well, they didn't lose to Iran. I mean, SpaceX didn't lose to Iran. In truth, SpaceX actually helped infiltrate Iran and tried to lead a failed color revolution. That didn't fail because of SpaceX. They were actually able to communicate because of SpaceX. SpaceX helped them. It's just the CIA, especially without NED and USAID, is so hamstrung and incompetent that it was obvious to all. That's why it failed. All right. And yeah, I mean, we're getting our asses kicked. But anyway, now, one other thing I wanted to point out, this is an independent outlet, a award-winning independent outlet, ProPublica. They won a Pulitzer. They did a study, or they were able to get from court records a list of the foreign investors from SpaceX. Nobody else reported this, but investors in China secretly acquired stakes. So now you're helping, China being involved with this. Now it's, this was national security. Now it gets very muddy. But one previously unreported SpaceX investor has ties to Chinese military contractors, only revealed after ProPublica went to court to obtain it. So this happened earlier this week on the 18th, 5 days ago. All right. New details come from a private investor list obtained by ProPublica that sheds light on a particularly delicate issue for Musk's rocket company. Again, that's what we're going to learn. It's not really a rocket company. It's a data center company that just happens to dabble in space exploration with its future plans to expand there. And they need the rockets and everything else in order to support that. But that's not really what this is. So, while there is no ban on Chinese investment in U.S. military contractors, such investment is heavily regulated. How is there no ban on Chinese investment in military contractors? That, by the way, is also insane. So, where's the thing? I read the company's IPO last week was the largest ever, making Musk the world's first trillionaire. I'm going to get to that in a few minutes. Musk also has extensive business interests in China, where Tesla builds many of its cars. They're losing market share like crazy over there because of all the stuff that he's done with Trump. New records detail at least a dozen investors with addresses in mainland China, Hong Kong, or Russia who acquired stakes in SpaceX years ago through a middleman firm in the U.S. called Tomales Bay Capital. The investments are relatively small, ranging from $800,000 to $40 million, made between 2018 and 2021. This one investment came from an entity owned by David Su. He's the co-founder of the prominent Beijing venture capital firm MPCI. So if these guys are going to be working with NASA and our military, how does it work that they're also going to be embedded or involved, have Chinese investors? I don't know. But that's not the guy that we're talking about. There's no evidence that Su did anything improper. The key question from the U.S. government's perspective is whether China-based investors get access to non-public information about their technology or strategies, which I'm guessing they don't. They're silent investors. Now, the other one, a lawyer for Tomales Bay, said that the firm has not provided any non-public sensitive info regarding the company to investors. I believe that. I genuinely believe that most of the investors are not calling up the board of SpaceX to get information about secrets, trade secrets that the company's up to, so that they can then duplicate them or steal them in Russia or China or wherever. All right. Here it is. The new documents come from a dispute in Delaware involving Tomales Bay Capital. The court records were unsealed this week after ProPublica moved to make them public with help of the attorneys from Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press and the law firm Shaw Keller. Tomales Bay Capital appealed to the Delaware Supreme Court, which ruled in favor of ProPublica. They wanted to keep this silent. Why? Because Tomales Bay Capital is run by an investor named Iqbaljit Kalon. All right. He's been close to SpaceX's leadership and even involved in the company's operations. This is the guy who's been investing for all these foreigners that could potentially set off red flags with the government and the military, but because they're doing it through this cutout, it's fine. All right. This guy has been with the company in one form or fashion longer than I have, which means that from the beginning, it's got foreign money invested in it. Really interesting. Before SpaceX went public, this guy made a fortune by acting as a middleman for investors, hoping to add the rocket company to their portfolio. His firm regularly bought SpaceX stock, packaged it into investment funds, then charged fees to investors who bought pieces of those funds. And I'm sure he was not scrutinous as to who's investing in them to see if the military wouldn't like that. While ProPublica and other outlets have previously reported on the existence of Chinese investors in SpaceX, the identities of most of the rocket company's investors have been closely guarded. This investor list adds hundreds of names to the public picture of who owns SpaceX. The list details investments in several Tomales Bay Capital funds that have acquired SpaceX stock. It's possible that some of the funds own stakes in other companies too. It's actually quite possible and quite likely. Right, so here you've got Betsy DeVos as one of the other investors. A British Virgin Islands company owned by Indonesian billionaires. Then you've got shell companies whose ultimate owners remain hidden. Like, this is just shady and shady. Look at this. One of them actually called themselves a Delaware LLC called HAL 9001 Partners Fund I. All right? HAL, like, from Space Odyssey. I cannot do that, Dave. Like AI data center investing. It's kind of funny, right? So this one was the Treasury Department recently fined a company that was co-owned by this guy hundreds of millions of dollars for managing a different investment on behalf of a sanctioned Russian oligarch. And it's not Putin, by the way. It's one of his buddies. So that's also interesting. So you've got foreign investment that they can't necessarily track that's literally having to be exposed through lawsuits of the shadow company that's investing in them to get lists of who's investing in this damn thing. But here's the other big thing that I wanted to point out. And this is going to run a video autoplay, and I don't want it to autoplay. This happened after its day one rally that ran the company up to a valuation of higher than even Amazon and Walmart, which is crazy. Company has no earnings. This is the other thing I wanted to point out is this chart right here. This chart is the most important thing. SpaceX has a mega cap price tag. Now, this was found on Yahoo Finance from AlphaSpace. SpaceX has a mega cap price tag, meaning that it's right now priced as like the 8th most valuable stock in the world. More than Meta, more than Tesla. It's worth more than Tesla. They don't make anything. But they lost $8 billion last year, whereas every other company in this space, at this level, is making billions a year in profit. They're losing billions. Right? Natalie, I don't know if it's the AI bubble that's popping, maybe, but what it's telling me is that there is hype around this investment and around this company that is completely unwarranted. That's interesting. I'm not showing any glitches here. I've had a couple of people say that it looks like the stream is glitchy over on Rumble. I don't think anybody's having any problems over on YouTube. Overvalued is absolutely true. Beyond overvalued. And we're going to get to that in a second. Because our friend Rich Slutzky, Crying Grim, wrote a very long deep dive article breaking down all of this IPO and specifically what is SpaceX as a company. because you heard ProPublica refer to it multiple times as a rocket company. But how many of you knew that SpaceX also owns Twitter, XAI, as well as Grok? They own Grok. So let's get into this. Lies, damn lies, and SpaceX AI, the IPO that wasn't, and the crash that might be. How one man's creative financial chores might doom his entire empire in one arrogant Tesla bot-like motion. So again, this is from friend of the show, friend of the network, Crying Grim, aka Rich Slutzky. He says, "Dearest reader, I come bearing news. Elon Musk, recently minted as the world's first trillionaire, if you don't count the Rothschilds or some of the other people, has managed to do something that, to my eye, looks quite risky long term. Something built on a foundation of sand, assembled out of playing cards, and balanced on a fucking egg. Swept up in the headlines of the SpaceX IPO, I saw something people appeared to miss at first read. Some cracks in the newly poured concrete foundation. The simple truth of what SpaceX really is now and what the real numbers break down into. So let's get on with it." So here's the picture from the NASDAQ. As I'm sure you're aware, Elon Musk owns SpaceX. That is not a contested fact. Elon also owns XAI. That is not a contested fact. But in March of 2026, SpaceX moved to bring XAI into its orbit, acquiring it with limited fanfare. Meaning that the people that gave him $44 billion to buy Twitter from Jack Dorsey and investors and take it private just got paid out. We don't know exactly how much they got paid out yet. We'll find that. I can look into that. But fast forward to now, in SpaceX, the combined $1.25 trillion company was being listed on the NASDAQ. The details of the deal interested Rich far more than anything about the headline figures. We'll get to that in a moment. You need your context window refreshed. So he's got the headline figures that 2026 Q1 capital expenditures for XAI, again, that's Grok only, $7.7 billion. SpaceX is spending versus revenue as a percentage. 2023, they were only spending 42%. Q1 of this year, they spent 215% of their revenue, 215% more than what they generated. Their revenue was $18 billion. Their net loss was $5 billion for last year. So they're losing money, like I said. And this is really funny. The NASDAQ IPO has the combined SpaceX and XAI entity at $26.5 trillion of what they call TAM, or the total addressable market, which 80% is related directly to XAI. The current combined entity being classified, this is important, with the SEC under code 7370, meaning computer programming data processing services. Not an aerospace or telecommunications company, but officially registered with the agencies that list their stock. They are a data center and computing company. AI. Grok. Who sets the valuation is a really difficult question. There are auditors, but then it's also the investors set the valuation, and then you multiply the stock price times the number of outstanding shares, add in Elon's share, and that's what the stock's actually technically worth. Normally, a stock is worth 2 times earnings. The stock has no earnings, so it's a lot based on speculation. The NASDAQ IPO, like you said, shows computer programming. Sounds good, right? What's not to love about a bunch of eggheads making rockets and AI robots? It's a marriage made in heaven, surely. Rockets, AI, robotics, Asimov smiles. Foundations of future space exploration unfolding before our eyes. But therein lies the rub. And this is a picture of the hardware. This is from Colossus one of the data centers that they built. He says, AI, AI, AI. Okay, now that I've said the obligate number of times per investor demands, like a tech CEO striding onto the Computex stage, we can talk turkey. Generative, general AI, and more niche-tailored, specialized AI is quickly becoming one of the hottest investment properties of all time, or the world's biggest bubble waiting to pop, depending on who you ask. Rich says, I tend to be quite ambivalent. I understand the purpose and the mechanics of the tool. I see a whole galaxy of potential uses, and then I look at the rest of you meatbags and realize what we'll actually end up doing with it. If you're uninitiated or just otherwise refused to care when it came around the first time, Elon Musk famously purchased Twitter in October of 2022 for $44 billion, and alongside it, poured untold sums of money into developing his own in-your-face, inoffensive language reasoning, creative general AI model, Grok. Grok, of course, has made headlines for all the wrong reasons, especially for a tool that was initially sold as an unabashed and unwilling to dabble in propaganda, an agentic bullshit detector that would go on to be manipulated repeatedly, allegedly, by Musk and company to censor or override Grok's natural token generation, which are thoughts and words for AI. I remember a couple times they literally had to shut it down for espousing Nazi talking points. Putting these aside, Grok has not had an easy life, nor has the team behind it. So he goes into some history here that's important. The initial construction of the data center to house Grok, Colossus One, went well enough. It went quickly, starting in April 2024 and beginning phase 1 real-time operations just 122 days later, with 100,000 NVIDIA H100 GPUs all operating as they were told to by their firmware. By 2025, Colossus One had grown considerably, now a mixed fleet. Now you have 150,000 H100s, 50,000 H200s, and 30,000 more advanced modern GB200 Blackwell stock. What he's talking about here are the video cards, GPUs. These are the video cards that run the data centers. They bring all the computing power and all the heat, by the way. This build-out was less a simple data center and more a testament to Western hubris, building at unparalleled speed while maintaining the concept of more is better. If you learn anything from Rich's aviation pieces, it's that mixed fleets can actually be a mixed bag. Running only the Boeing 737 and sticking to the basics can be a lot more profitable and functional than trying to orchestrate your airline's functions across 737s, A320s, and Comac C919s, right? Now imagine doing that on a code base level in real time. The system simply isn't designed for the task, and the cracks begin to show immediately. You cannot piecemeal a supercomputer together out of different generations and platforms. Cray did not allow you to fucking mix and match in the 1970s. So right out of the gate, Colossus One and Grok's training therein was cock-blocked. Or Grok-blocked? Funny. Grok could not use the facility properly, and thus it was decided that XAI would rent out the ineffective mixed platform's capacity to its competitor Anthropic, developers of Claude Code, who in turn would use it for Claude's inference work, rather than Grok's model training as it initially expected. Now, this would bring immediate cash into the operations, which helps, but not at the scale necessary to keep the venture profitable. So it's offsetting cost is all it's doing. Anthropic, however, would end up at just 11% effective utilization rate of the Colossus One facility. So watch this one. It never really used it as more than a relief valve for other providers, a backup plan for a backup plan. And I love this line. It's poetic, really. One of Grok's largest competitors, Claude, running inference work on hardware built specifically for Grok for pennies on the dollar at 1/10 the utilization. Welcome to technology. That had to catch in the throat for the people at XAI. I feel badly for the engineering team that had to experience that. To reuse my airline framing device from earlier, imagine if Delta had 11% plane utilization purely by renting some to Southwest, and the other 89% of their fleet was left sitting parked, waiting to be used, but completely lifeless. That is a level of platform or fleet management failure that would make anyone wince from embarrassment. This wasn't Grok's home. It's a co-location for Anthropic. This wouldn't be the end of Grok, though, as Musk and XAI would shift their attention to a new, more streamlined 550,000 strong fleet of NVIDIA GB200 and GB300 Blackwell GPUs. A better performing and faster class of architecture, entirely unified. They literally built a second facility not far from Colossus 1, breaking ground last March, right around the same time that Colossus 1 had been bloated and leased to Anthropic. They opened their doors 6 months ago in January, with full build-out taking place now and expected to finish sometime in the middle of 2026. That's crazy. But worse, you've got Google involved. And here's how Google is intertwined in all of this. And I didn't even know this until I read this article, which is one of the reasons I'm bringing it. Now, we know that Google had been an early investor in SpaceX. In 2015, Google would enter into an arrangement with Fidelity to acquire a 10% share in SpaceX for $1 billion. Now the company's worth trillions. They owned 10% for $1 billion, with $900 million coming from them, in a move that at the time must have seemed incredibly straightforward. Space is the next frontier. This company is top of the class. Space telco is the next market, so on and so forth. Easy money. As it turns out, 11 years later, things aren't so easy, and they aren't as clear either. So, follow this logic. A decade ago, Google committed $900 million to fund rockets, space exploration, and SATCOM telco stuff. Now, they're paying rent on the data centers that their initial funding helped create, running advanced AI workloads in their competitor's house just to compete with the product they technically have a diluted from 10% stake in. Because it's now that it's gone public, the 10% is no longer 10%. People think it's now about 5 to 8%. By 2025, XAI is building its first server farm, Colossus 1. Google sees this, knows it has its own ambitions with Google Cloud Services and Gemini, but it lacks the critical infrastructure that XAI has already built and plans to expand further. So, in 2026, they pounce, entering an agreement that takes their title from investor to renter. A feedback loop of Google's own investment into SpaceX, now funding the rack space that Google intends to rent. A landlord, investor, and product competitor, but on a curiously cushy, one-sided contract. So basically, they let Musk write this contract for himself, which is crazy. The terms of the deal, released just days ago on June 5th, state Google plans to pay $920 million a month to XAI, or SpaceX, for 32 months of capacity inside the new data center, Colossus 2, that literally just opened this year. In this contract, Google has a very handy clause that permits them to walk away or seek reduced costs if the capacity can't be delivered before September 30th of this year. If in the future they decide to walk away, they only have to give 90 days notice after starting November 1st. All they need to do is 90 days, they're out of this contract. So that's a good term, but $920 million a month for the space. In short, now Google has Twitter by the balls. He's going to explain how. Not only was it an instrumental investor a decade before it mattered, it's now adding more funding into the mix in the form of this very generous, mutually beneficial deal that it can walk away from at any time within 3 months if it wants to. The real sweet meat, and that's like a lobster term, The sweet meat, though, the part he found most juicy, not only does Google directly benefit from the arrangement in the short and midterms, both boosting their own investment in SpaceX and finding low-cost, high-yield capacity available now, in the long term, Google stands to benefit from something even more to their bottom line. An effective Mobius strip of market control via the funding it injects and the profits it reaps, while keeping the whole thing quietly away at arm's distance, just so long as it doesn't blow up in their faces. So they're profiting from Twitter and from Musk and from all of this without anybody really knowing how much they're actually involved, is what he's saying. However, if Musk does something truly off the rails, or if Colossus 2 or 3 or beyond fail to work out, Google is highly exposed, not just as an investor, but as an entity deeply dependent on the infrastructure. Gemini could crash. Their enterprise AI push rests on compute capacity from XAI. They would be compelled to find it elsewhere, or their plan fails to materialize. In essence, Google rented a room in that house of cards after paying Elon Musk to build the damn thing and watching him install himself as dictator ad infinitum before signing the rental agreement. Read on to understand that part. It's a really juicy tidbit, too. So this is where it gets really technical about investing, retail investing, front loading, and governance. He says, like I mentioned to Rich, who's pretty sharp savvy with this stuff, the terms of the IPR are far more interesting than the actual pricing or percentage of target addressable market, total addressable market. That's already telling enough data, but there's more to the story here, a lot more, and I don't want to come across as glib or overreaching, but I sense some bullshit afoot. I think he's smart to sense that bullshit. You see, normally, large corporations have corporate boards, shareholders, institutional partners, corporate governance, executives, so on. And these secondary voices all moderate the tenor of the chief executive. They influence, guide, they inform at the head of the table who's making the decisions. Under this IPO, Musk doesn't answer to any such board. He now controls 82.4% of the voting power and 42% of the company's total equity, not just Class A shares. He now acts as a definition-accurate autocrat, a capitalist dictator who has no structure to hold him account beyond the most basic levels of individual or institutional shareholders and any remnants of government oversight left. But even there's another catch, and it's quite unusual for an IPO. Okay, I know I keep saying that, but this whole thing stinks. Here's the other rub. SpaceX and underwriters initially targeted 30% reserve of available stock for individual retail investors, eventually settling on 20% after considerable backlash in the financial sector. For frame of reference, standard IPOs tend to have 5 to 10% of all shares produced in the transaction reserved for this class of investor. They wanted to have 30% reserved for individual retail investors. That's BlackRock. That's Peter Thiel. That's Larry Ellison, potentially. Normally, they would put that at 5 to 10%. Here you're looking at, they wanted it at 30, they settled on 20. Having double and wanting triple gives an indication that Musk is further insulating himself from shocks or stonewalls by front-loading a disproportionate amount of retail investors. You and I, the layman, but the ones favorable to his personality. In a nutshell, he's looking for yes men to buy the stock, to let him rule as he sees fit, and to reap all the rewards of a publicly listed company without any of the meaningful oversight that would take place in the background during a normal business day. He answers to nobody, not shareholders, not a board. His loyal fans who still think "to the moon" is a real catchphrase and that their NFT is going to make a comeback someday will never ever show up to a shareholder meeting and hold him to account or say anything critical. They'll fawn over him, gloss over the problems, and enable him to continue. And then we come to the China problem. If all of this wasn't a sleepwalking through a disaster moment already, there's strong competition on the horizon from the East. Now remember, this is now primarily a data center company, not a rocket and space exploration company. DeepSeek, my favorite AI company, a name some will recognize already as a disruptive influence on the sector, is making strides even while facing the brunt of U.S. imperialism in the form of technology transfer withholding or embargo. Forced to exist in a literal scarcity mentality, DeepSeek takes an entirely different approach from the more and more expensive is better refrain of the West and XAI. They're able to compute a whole lot more on a whole lot less. Starting with a splash, DeepSeek R1 caught the attention of researchers and users alike for its complex reasoning, high-fidelity output, and cost per token exchange, i.e., how much your message to it and its response costs. It's a fraction of what OpenAI or Grok costs. This was a monumental moment and something that made established players sit up fully and take note because it was unexpected. DeepSeek should not be possible given the limited access to high bandwidth memory and complex high shelf silicon NPUs and GPUs. So what they did was they took older NVIDIA chips and NVIDIA video card GPUs and made it work. We're talking about data centers, and we're talking about China competing with Grok and XAI and SpaceX, which now owns the data centers that own Twitter and Grok and XAI. It's all kind of got merged into one with this new IPO. Right? So the founder of DeepSeek and his team managed to not just beat the competition where they stood, they blew them out of the water in an incredibly efficient manner. His background in quantitative finance gave him a strong understanding that every exchange, every watt, every millisecond and floating point calculation was required to justify its own existence. Not a struggle mentality, but one of ruthless efficiency. So he talks more about a little bit about DeepSeek, which is another one of these large language model AI, but it's Chinese-based. They basically scraped all of ChatGPT and then ran it a whole lot cheaper on older technology and better than OpenAI did. And Sam Altman was freaking out. All right. The reason why is architectural innovation, pen to paper, days in the library, long nights of coding, trying, failing, doing it again. Skip meals, missed showers, family that loves you and misses you but rarely sees you, dedication, belief in something, math, prayer, rebooting, stress. To go into the mechanics of a large language model is beyond the scope of this piece, so I'll keep it plain. Understand this, DeepSeek committed to finding ways to reduce not just memory and GPU utilization per token exchanged, but also to improve the natural flow and prose of their agents, becoming near lifelike, almost scary good, able to read you like a book and get you to talk in a way that no other can. He says other AI agents I've engaged with are perfectly okay if a little limp, inoffensive, lifeless, and straight-laced, offering lectures where there should be something else. Okay, DeepSeek is quite a bit more intense and natural feeling I've found. Right? There is some level of censorship he's talking about. It doesn't have that lifeless drone problem, not quite to the constraints of currently available Western-built models like Gemini, that's Google, or Grok, that's Twitter, or Anthropic, that's Claude Code. It's liberating to exchange with DeepSeek V4 Flash, not just for the quality of the output or the fantastic cost to performance ratio I enjoy, but the agent has abilities that no Western model has. There is some censorship, like I said. I asked it one time about Israel, and it didn't really want to give me an answer. Okay. What it says is that for similar tasks, DeepSeek is actually better than Grok or Gemini. So all of this money that Twitter is pouring into these data centers, they're already behind the curve because there's a Chinese competitor that's ahead of them already right now, despite all the money that they've dumped into it. Right? China out America yet again, but here we are, and it's just getting started. So he says, we've got quite a perfect storm here. A company quietly stumbling the path of financial insolvency, owned and controlled entirely by a mentally unstable man-child who had out of wedlock children with his employees, allegedly. A NASDAQ IPO claiming it has a $26.5 trillion of total addressable market, of which 22 to 23.375 trillion alone is Grok. Wait, what? Okay, so that alone is insane. No company at all has an addressable market of $22 trillion. There's not an addressable market right now of $22 trillion to spend on anything. If you got 100% of that market, it means nothing. So what he's saying, though, is that only leaves about $3 to $4 trillion for the addressable market of SpaceX. I've already given headline figures at the top, but this is nonsensical. I'm sorry. We're not even into the real potential problems yet, and it's already gone wrong. So $3 to $4 trillion for the total addressable market of SpaceX. They lost $8 billion last year. How the hell are they supposed to make $3 trillion? I asked several AI agents and human beings to check my math, but everyone I asked just said in response, Chuck, Jesus fucking Christ, really? Damn. I try to remain objective in those pieces that I bring you, but this is just fucking stupid. Holy bananas. This isn't a bubble. This is something that could suck up a fucking galaxy. Rover from The Prisoner would be impressed. This thing is too big to pop now, but just wait. If your dreams of high-end machine tools and NVIDIA Blackwell GPUs hitting the market dirt cheap and surplus auctions are keeping you going, read on, because it can still crash and take down multiple important mechanisms with it. So here's where he starts to speculate. All right. And he lays out all of these different inflection points where we're at right now. There are dozens, possibly hundreds of ways this whole situation could possibly go hopelessly wrong and cause knock-on effects in myriad institutions, global aerospace, SATCOM and AI, plus the broader economy, the American space program, and potentially military contract fallout and potential self-harm. So let's just take a look at a few. I promise when we're done, we can look at how this might work out and reveal as totally misguided, but I'm not optimistic. So here's one of the vectors. You've got Musk, who's more than just a CEO, and I'm choosing my words deliberately to keep this piece flowing, lest it turn into that personal diatribe against the autocratic oligarch. Right? A founder who is simultaneously the most successful industrialist since Howard Hughes and the most unreliable narrator on the planet. He's also a heavy market manipulator. The man bought Twitter for $44 billion, renamed it, cratered the value by 3/4, then used it as the Buena Vista distribution company to his own world of Walt Disney futurism. An arm to sell you Tesla, X Finance, crypto, Grok. By the way, the Buena Vista distribution company is the secret holding company that Disney used to acquire all of the properties around Disney World so that nobody knew that Disney was doing that and got wise until it was too late. Musk has a public persona that oscillates between mad genius and 4chan troll. There is no in between. You either get meaningful activity, Tesla, his crown jewel, or you get nonsense from his personal opinion repertoire. This is a huge problem for a guy who's been accused of fraud, stalking, harassment, lies. It's a credibility problem. When you're the one at the top and you have a credibility problem, you need something to moderate that oscillation or to address at least one component of it. Something, anything. He doesn't. Next, you have the financial vector. Classifying SpaceX as a data center company while allowing 20% of initial stock to individual retail investors is very much in line with the logic of it's my company, my rocket, my AI, mine, that the West often displays. Greed, self-interest, short-sightedness. It's a giant concern given the consequences. The Google deal with jettison clause, the Colossus One debacle being the primary and overwhelming platform for NASA right now. It's not just a house of cards if you squint. You can walk up, pull at the ace of spades, and watch it fall in real time. Unfortunately for all of us, meaningful advancements in sciences like AI, robotics, and space exploration would all suffer if it does. This isn't a metaphor. This is the kind of stuff you end up watching on YouTube on a channel like Cold Fusion long after KPMG and Deloitte show up to audit what's left and the fine elected people on the DC Hill start drafting their House and Senate committee hearing questions. This is Enron with data centers. But this is a huge problem with a bill that will come due. You can't unfuck it. You can bail it out, but you can't undo what just happened. All right. The governance vector, meaning that there is nobody around that can stop him if he wants to do stuff. There's no board. There's no one to blunt his whims. And then you have the techno-strategic planning vector. The rockets are real, built and proven in some cases. Starship represents genuine progress in terms of intergalactic travel, even if we're still barely leaving lower Earth orbit. He said his fight here isn't with the engineers or sauce. The sauce, it's fine. Inspirational even to go to the moon and beyond for real. Just not for meme coins. Starlink is a hot revenue generator and a tool of imperialism as shown by the U.S. forcing it into play in the Ukraine-Russia proxy war, but offers incredible advantage to the end user in non-combat situations too. The continued integration with aviation and cellular providers shows that Starlink, while messy and resource intensive, is viable. Well, it's viable, but I don't know if it's necessarily profitable or scalable or, doable. The launch market is real. The space part is still real. It's just being used as a loss leader and a narrative anchor for an AI play that seems likely to underdeliver and continue to be beaten at its own game by people who've had a $2 street cart noodle bowl for lunch and slept under their desk the night before. We're being out-hustled. Then you have the human vector. This is a human toll, really. The people who tripped over themselves to pay $80,000 plus for a Cybertruck at launch. There were tons of them, only to be hopelessly disappointed, yet still somehow viciously defended at every turn. The retail investors who mortgage their futures today on the proviso that Elon has their best interests at heart and can't be second-guessed. There's a ton of them. The engineers at Colossus One, who must have known before the order was placed that fragmenting the platform like that would cause untold problems, but couldn't say no or even explain why. The same team who watched that masterclass in speed relegated to 11% usage by their competitor, not their own model. The taxpayer who ends up footing the bill for the subsidies, the job creation, the pleasure of existing at all. That's one of the vectors. These are just the broader implications. So here's the big scenario. It's now early 2027. All of this collapses on its face and SpaceX tanks. The egg tilts slightly and the sands shift. The cards go flying. Grok 5 is a huge miss. Disjointed, unnatural tone and prose, slow, unable to compete even with its roommate, Gemini 4 Flash. Remember, they're also using Grok XAI servers. DeepSeek v4.5 releases and makes both look like child's play. SpaceX stock dips. Elon in turn goes on Twitter and spews a tirade, a really vulgar, hurtful, and long one. It doesn't play well for anyone. His individual retail investors protect his image and manage it in conversation, but the damage is done. He loses the Google contract as it violated some basic don't be a douchebag online term of the deal, and they exit. They take their business elsewhere. Anthropic moves on to a new version of Claude, and it no longer needs that 11% excess inference from Colossus 1. Now you have a totally dead data center. They part ways. SpaceX is now hemorrhaging their 80% chunk of total addressable market in one fell swoop. The dip on Musk stocks bleeds into other tech stocks and causes a bit of a momentary mini crash, stopped by the quantitative easing on the government side very quietly, because Trump will step in to help out his buddy. This knock-on effect impacts not just the SpaceX brand, but all the tech companies in general, dragging them down in reputation by proxy. This becomes a bigger issue and continues to snowball. Musk loses control of the narrative, and eventually even his loyal fan base has had enough, kind of like Israel. They start selling off their now toxic shares. People start calling their money managers, telling them to drop SpaceX. The snowball continues, and eventually Musk is putting what little cash on hand he has into it rapidly just to prop it up. At some point, he calls it. He's tapping out, and the company will simply fold. The most likely response in this situation, I think, from the government side would be a formal bailout, perhaps even structured under a breakup vis-a-vis Dodd-Frank, with SpaceX launch or Aerospace becoming a government-owned entity under NASA or Department of Energy joint heading. It could even be a DoD joint heading. It could be a Defense Department. XAI, Grok, and the server farms are left to rot, sold off piece by piece on eBay to people who have the good intuition to look for high-value surplus kit. In the end, Musk would be made whole as the single largest shareholder, institutions next, and individual retail shareholders would be left holding the bag, last in line to be paid back. The system would continue, the human talent behind it, the XAI technicians and engineers who worked so hard to build it, would likely be headhunted by other companies. But SpaceX at the IPO would be gone. A footnote. Choked to death on its own hubris. The biggest IPO in history, gone within a year or two. That's the doomsday scenario. That's assuming that nobody steps in to bail it out. Here's his other scenario that's really bad for everyone. That the above happens, but instead of a government bailout, the DC crowd turns their nose and balks. They refuse to bail out a trillionaire's property because his half-rate AI and cloud compute plans didn't work out. They say, so long, thanks for all the Tesla bots, and leave it to the market to decide. The market isn't interested. The market is fascinated by up-and-coming properties that could fill the gap of SpaceX, not as a compute or AI company, which is already a market well saturated, but for the aerospace engineering and space development or exploration, like Virgin stuff. They're content to wait 18 to 24 months for a new company that could supersede SpaceX and wish Elon all the best with Twitter and Tesla. SpaceX aerospace engineers lose work and are only somewhat actively sought by other companies who already have active talent pools full of promising candidates. Their work and culture is lost to time. The bulk majority of non-specialized staff enter other fields out of necessity, promising future dreams snuffed out needlessly. I don't really care about them. An entire company of proud, knowledgeable people trapped, moving from progress to eventual destitution, or at best, a lower class standing. Again, I'm not really weeping for the XAI engineers. NASA grinds to a near stop, buoyed by only the cosmonauts and the Boeing capsule on other hurriedly sourced launch partners, and desperately clinging to a big promise from another billionaire, Jeff Bezos, to rework Blue Origin to better support NASA requirements, as well as keep its own current consumer focus. That's years away, requiring untold sums. In turn, global aerospace development stagnates on the space front. China, which once held SpaceX as a cooperative participant and competitor in space exploration, no longer has that rivalry, acting as a driving force, pushing it to be better, to innovate more, to think harder. So now they start to atrophy because the challenge is absent and the victor by default stagnates. Progress on a human level, on a species level, is lost. Time that cannot be recovered is squandered needlessly. All right. There's huge risk of losing global interest towards space exploration as a concept at this point, a kindred spirit for decades, lost by one tragic undertaking. Again, don't really give a shit about that. We got starving people on this planet. I don't need space exploration. And mostly space exploration is about they're polluting this world so bad it's going to be uninhabitable. So they're looking for ways to get the fuck off, and only the richest people are going to survive to do that. Fuck them. Or they want to put data centers in space because they're polluting the planet so badly. And again, fuck that. He also lays out a whole other scenario where scenario B happens, but former SpaceX staff get hired on elsewhere. Their spirit lives on through other companies and perhaps nowhere as large scale, but just as meaningful. That's nice. But the other big thing I wanted to talk about here, and my feeling is Google steps in. Alphabet. Remember that they've pumped this whole thing up from minute one. And the thing that I think Google is going to want out of all of this, beyond the data centers, which they'll then take over and own because it's housing, it's housing Gemini already, is Twitter. Anybody remember Google Plus? Google really, really, really wanted to compete with Facebook. They created a social media company of their own called Google Plus that was a massive failure. It integrated with a ton of different stuff. But this entity collapsing could end up resulting in Google acquiring the Twitter portion of this organization if it ever has to be broken up. So he does look at some upsides. It's not 100% doom and gloom. I want to be fair and highlight. There's forced maturity. That the SpaceX IPO and public scrutiny that comes with it is the governance that I didn't account for in anything I said above. Not immediately, slowly, through the SEC, institutional investors, analysts, and short sellers, all poking at that 11% utilization on Colossus One and the financial losses incurred along the way. This might be a meaningful push to separate the AI and space divisions into their own brands again. The market might demand it. The system may do what the founder refused to, restructure the brand and protect the divisions from improperly intermingling financially. He's doing that constantly. In order to make a Tesla number, he sold a couple 100,000 Tesla Model X's or the Cybertrucks to one of his other companies. All right. Then there's the what happens if Grok just works and doesn't crash, and it can compete with the Chinese. My assumption in the above scenarios relies on Grok 4 being mediocre now, and a potential Blackwell-based Grok 5 still being mediocre, even after the hardware shift is 100% done. That could change. And if it does, all right, it's passable. there's a serious chance that DeepSeek and Gemini advancing were catalysts for the engineering team to rework the next one or modify this. They're constantly updating their newer versions of the models. And this is what, whoever's ahead of this is what ends up the winner, allegedly. All right, then they would have to adopt that lean, clean, scarcity-first approach and make every token gen count, earn its keep. I don't think it does. All right, this is, again, making an assumption. The third thing is diversification. There's a strong chance that the market will be fine even if SpaceX disappears tomorrow. Rocket Lab's Neutron, Blue Origin's New Glenn, Stoke Space, Relativity, the launch market is diversifying rapidly post-2020. The old monopolies now find themselves with smart, tenacious competition, and it's fierce. It requires more time to mature. Would NASA lose productivity in the meantime? Perhaps. But space travel and that yearning we've all had for time immaterial will be safe, and the through line continues. So again, you've got multiple space exploration rocket companies already out there competing with SpaceX. You've got multiple data center companies competing with SpaceX. You've got multiple social media companies competing with Twitter. I mean, look at how much Substack has eaten into Twitter's market share in the last year. So he says, we've got this perfect storm: stiff competition, financial house of cards, mentally unstable autocrat at the top, and a burgeoning aerospace company that does damn good work that we all need, married to a yet unproven, sometimes misconfigured AI server farm cloud compute network that took 85% of the oxygen out of the room and called itself SpaceX. I can't fix this. You can't fix this. None of us can fix this. The question that I think more than anything needs to be asked by all of us is quite simple. What the hell do we do with critical national infrastructure that's managed so badly? It's integrated into our culture, our government, our military. And without it, we're worse off, stagnant, or even regressing as a species. The Cold War refrain was government will build it and build it better. Star Wars, the Russian dead man switch, you name it. The 90s and 2000s brought us privatization is better because it's decentralized and gets more profits into the hands of more people. But that's just neoliberalism, and we know that that's a failed ideology. The 2020s answer, the one begging to be written by us, gasping to live, is we need a new model because both of these have serious issues that caused us problems before. So he says, I feel compelled to end this with a reminder that this is not an opinion about Musk. I'm far more interested in the implications of this deal rather than his personality. I am by no means a fan. I critique wealth in pretty much every post, but this runs much deeper. This is tyranny in place of a corporate board, and in the balance hangs the future of humanity. The thing that so many have written about, cried about, dreamed about, been terrified of, space exploration. It's a core part of our collective id, and we should probably handle it as the more meaningful interplay of conceptual, material, physical sciences that it is. It's a delicate thing. Treat it with respect. I guess, sure, again, it's not a space exploration company. Like he said, it's a data company that they happen to slap the name SpaceX on. And that is the biggest rub of all of this. Now, also remember that these frauds can be kept afloat for a long time. Because, are you paying close attention? On a counterpoint, Donald J. Trump stock is still not at zero, even though they have no earnings. They have negative earnings. They're losing $4 a share. That's been running for 2 years, and he's been able to leverage the net assets multiple times already. Will Musk try something similar? Will he leverage his ownership stake in all of this to go get something else He's done it in the past. It's not a lady, it's a man. A man, it's Rich Slutzky. Does this man know that Elon Musk destroys his entire fleet of satellites every 3 years and won't recycle? Elon does horrible work for humanity. Yes, I know Rich does this. Yeah, where's Monarch to talk about decentralized Bitcoin? Right. Well, I'm sure he'll be around and he'll have plenty to say about this and be disappointed that he missed it live. It is the modern day space race, cookies. All right. First to AI dominance with quantum computing. And by the way, quantum computing is the reason that they're going to say it's going to break Bitcoin. That quantum algorithm. Space exploration is selling pipe dreams to morons who think we can colonize other worlds. Yeah. Space Zionists. Just what we need. Unbelievable. Thanks for sticking with me through that. I know that was a long one and it got technical. I warned you it was going to get technical, but and I've got a couple long pieces for the fuck Israel part, which we're going to get to. Again, that was what does he call this? Counterspin, lies, damn lies, and spin by Rich Slutzky over on Substack, and of course, I will link to this in the in my post with all the links from the show. Yeah, there's so much to that, and I knew it was going to take a while. The alphabet people need to stay out of our cereal. Maybe. They will get hired by the alphabet people, I agree. Or they'll go work at Boeing like you predicted. Cookies. Cookies knows what's up. All right. It's crazy. Again, I am, so the bottom line is as an investor, I'm not investing in this. I'm running the fuck away. I would short it, but I don't know how long before the stock actually tanks, because the market is weird with stuff like this. I mean, look, Nokia is still in existence as a company. When was the last time you saw a Nokia cell phone anywhere in the world? You know, because of the AMC nonsense. They're losing crazy money. They've still been around for years. I'm nervous to say short the stock, but I certainly would not invest. I would run in the other direction. There are way better companies to invest in than this. And I don't think that the speculation for most retail investors is worth it, or they have the time to wait for it to actually pay off. So, support independent media because we need it more than ever. I don't know too many places that will do a 1 hour deep dive and read an entire article like that, doing a technical breakdown of SpaceX and its fundamentals. I appreciate everyone on that list that supports us and gives me the freedom to do something like that. I think it's super important, and we can clip up parts of that will help people make it easier to understand. And there are really critical parts of that, like understanding that it's not an aerospace company or a rocket company, but an AI company and a data center company. The ways to, again, support INN are those people on that screen already have. I appreciate them. Cash App, $ Indie News Network, ko-fi.com/Indie News Network. That's ko-fi.com. PayPal.me/Indie News Network. Subscribe monthly at patreon.com/Indie News Network or at indiemediatoday.com over on Substack. We also publish to the network's INNnewsletter.com. And then we've got our website, IndieNewsNow.com, where you get news 24/7, unfiltered, with no ads, and from over 100 different sources. You can pick up merch, and you can watch INN live, or you can tip the network when with a Stripe link and no fees. Support independent media because we need it more than ever. And I will see you next Tuesday night, fam. Have a good night. See you all. No! We just fucking lost the stream!
I guess this isn't such an awful place. Is that what you want me to say? You prove it's possible to sleep